The first thing I remember is the sound of glass shattering somewhere below me, followed by the rush of wind as my body tipped forward into empty space. I didn't scream. I couldn't. One moment I was standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The sunset turned the limestone villas gold, and the next I was falling, betrayed by hands I trusted. Instinct, not thought, saved me. My fingers slammed into cold metal, gripping an iron safety rail hidden just beneath the curve of the cliff. My shoulders screamed as my body snapped to a stop, my feet dangling over another 100-foot drop to jagged rock and foaming water. Above me, voices rose. Calm, controlled, and then relieved. Before I tell you how I ended up hanging between life and death, do me a small favor. If you're listening to this story, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment saying where you're watching from. It helps stories like this reach the people who might need them. And what I discovered next nearly cost me my life. I stayed silent, my arms trembling, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear it. That silence wasn't weakness. It was a decision. 48 hours earlier, I'd been standing in a glass-walled conference room in Redwood City, California, signing the final papers that transferred ownership of Calderon Systems, the company I'd built from nothing over 3 decades to a private investment group for just over $110 million. My daughter, Lila, stood beside me as I signed the last page, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Congratulations, Dad," she said, her voice steady but thin. Mom would have been proud. My wife, Eleanor, had been gone 5 years. Cancer doesn't negotiate. She used to tell me I worked too much, that no company was worth missing bedtime stories and school plays. I always told her I was doing it for our future. She was right. I just realized it too late. "I'm done," I told Lila as we left the office. "Not retire for a week, done. Really done. I want my life back." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. At 37, she ran her own architecture firm in Boston, pulling the same brutal hours I once did. "That sounds great, Dad. I can't right now. The Harbor Point project is at a critical phase. Come away with me," I said. 3 days. My birthday's next week. Somewhere your mom and I always talked about going. She hesitated, already reaching for her phone, then stopped, really looked at me. "Okay," she said quietly. 3 days. I rented a cliffside villa in Port Azure, a postcard-perfect coastal town in Portugal. White stone terraces, infinity pool, ocean stretching forever. I invited only a few people: Lila, my longtime attorney Richard Hale, and my nephew, Nolan Pierce. Nolan was my late brother's son. I'd helped raise him after my brother died in a highway accident years ago, put him through college, gave him a job at Calderon Systems. He was charming, sharp, and ambitious, everything investors loved. "You earned this, Uncle Grant," Nolan said when I told him about the trip. 30 years of grinding, time to enjoy the payoff. There was something in his tone I didn't recognize then. Hunger, maybe. I ignored it. The villa was breathtaking. Even Lila put her phone away when she saw it. "This doesn't look real," she whispered. Richard arrived later, already uncomfortable in linen clothes, laptop in hand just in case. Nolan showed up last, with gifts: a rare bottle of bourbon for me, designer sunglasses for Lila. To new beginnings, he toasted that night as we ate on the terrace. The ocean below us burned orange and pink. Our housekeeper, Sophia, moved quietly around us, refilling glasses, never interrupting. I mentioned setting up a foundation, helping young founders without access to capital. "That's generous," Nolan said quickly. "But have you considered estate exposure? You could lose a fortune without proper structuring." "I'm not trying to save money," I said. "I'm trying to use it well." "Of course. Just planning matters, especially at your age." Lila frowned. "Nolan, it's a vacation." He raised his glass again, smiling. "Family first." But I noticed the way he watched me over the rim of his drink. The next morning I found him already awake, typing furiously on his laptop. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He snapped it shut. "Just emails." He started talking about wills. Executors. What would happen if something happened to me? You should name someone younger, he said carefully. Someone who understands modern finance. Someone who could help Lila. Like you? I asked. He laughed too quickly. Just saying. That uneasy feeling settled in my gut, the one that had warned me before bad deals and false partners. Later that day, Nolan suggested a drive along the coast. A scenic overlook. Best views in the region. He insisted on photos. Of Lila and me. Then just me. Turn toward the ocean, he said. Let me get the light. I felt him step closer behind me. Too close. Training from a lifetime ago kicked in. I shifted sideways just as hands reached for my back. Nolan stumbled forward instead, catching himself on the stone barrier. Whoa, he laughed. These cliffs are dangerous. His face was flushed. His eyes weren't laughing. That night, he kept refilling my glass. I poured it out when he wasn't looking. On my birthday, Sophia prepared a special dinner. Nolan produced another bottle, this one shipped from California, my favorite vintage. As he poured, Sophia froze. Her face drained of color. I set the glass down untouched. I think I'll stick to water tonight, I said. Nolan's smile tightened. That was when I knew. And that was when I realized this wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about survival. I didn't sleep that night. The villa was quiet except for the low rush of the ocean far below, but my mind wouldn't slow down. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of stone cooling after sunset, the soft clink of dishes as Sophia cleaned the kitchen, the distant hum of a car winding along the coastal road. I lay there replaying moments I brushed aside before, Nolan's fixation on my will, the way he steered conversations toward death as if it were an item on a checklist, the flash of something dark in his eyes when I stepped away from the cliff. At dawn, I got up and went to the terrace. The horizon was just beginning to lighten, the sea flat and steel-colored. Nolan was already there, leaning against a railing with a cup of coffee, staring out like a man lost in thought. Early riser, I said. He turned, startled for a fraction of a second before his smile snapped into place. Habit, marketing never sleeps. I poured myself coffee, black, and watched him from the corner of my eye. His hands weren't steady. Not shaking exactly, just tense, like they were always ready to grab something. About yesterday, he said casually, the overlook. You okay? Looked like you almost slipped. I'm fine, I said. You came pretty close yourself. He laughed, but the sound landed hollow. Guess we're not as young as we used to be. That was the second time he'd lumped us together like that, as if I were already on the other side of something. Later that morning, Richard pulled me aside. We stood in the shaded corridor near the study, the air cool and smelling faintly of stone and citrus cleaner. You look like hell, he said quietly. What's going on? I told him everything I could without sounding insane. The wine, the cliff, Nolan's questions. I didn't mention Sophia yet. I wasn't sure how much she'd actually seen, and I didn't want to drag her into something unless I had to. Richard listened, his expression tightening with every sentence. You're saying you think your nephew is positioning himself, he said carefully. Possibly more than that. I'm saying my instincts are screaming, I replied, and they've saved me before. He exhaled slowly. Instincts aren't evidence. I know, but they're a warning. That afternoon, Lila and I took a walk along the lower terraces. She kicked off her sandals and let the stone warm her feet, something she hadn't done since she was a kid. You're distracted, she said. Both you and Nolan. Did something happen? I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell her. But the image of her defending him, of dismissing me as paranoid, stopped me cold. Just adjusting, I said. Big life changes. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That evening, Nolan suggested another outing. A coastal restaurant perched even closer to the edge than the villa, famous for its views. Richard declined, claiming a headache. Lila wanted to go. I agreed, telling myself I needed to see how far Nolan would push. At the restaurant, Nolan ordered a bottle of wine without asking. I watched him carefully as the server poured. When my glass was set in front of me, I didn't touch it. You're really sticking to water? Nolan asked lightly. Doctor's orders, I said. Heart health. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe fear. Before he masked it, dinner passed with forced laughter and stories from Lila's work. Nolan barely ate. He kept checking his phone, then putting it face down like he didn't want to miss something. On the walk back to the car, he slowed his pace until he was beside me, slightly behind Lila. You ever think about what happens after? He asked quietly. After what? After you're gone. I stopped walking. Lila took a few more steps before realizing we weren't beside her. That's a strange question, I said. It's practical, he insisted. You built something massive. People will fight over it. My daughter won't, I said. He gave a thin smile. You're sure about that? That was when I felt it. Not suspicion anymore, but certainty. Whatever Nolan was planning, it wasn't abstract. It wasn't someday. It was close. Immediate. Back at the villa, I went straight to the kitchen. Sophia was there, washing glasses, her movements precise. Sophia, I said softly, can I ask you something? She froze and nodded. At dinner last night, I continued, when the wine was poured, you looked frightened. Why? She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. Her English was careful, deliberate. I saw something earlier, she said. I was afraid. My pulse picked up. What did you see? She swallowed. Your nephew, in the kitchen, with the bottle. She told me everything in short, broken phrases. How she'd come in quietly and seen him open the wine, sprinkle something into it, cork it again. How he'd been muttering to himself. Words she didn't fully understand, but enough to chill her blood. Heart, she said. He said heart. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm. Did anyone else see this? I asked. She shook her head. Only me. Do you have cameras here? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Kitchen hall. Storage area. Can you show me the footage? Minutes later, we were in her small office. The video wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Nolan. The bottle. The motion of his hand. The vial. There it was. Proof. I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not even anger. Focus. Can you save this? I asked. Yes, she said. I keep copy. Good. Don't tell anyone yet. I left the office and stepped out into the cooling night air. Nolan was on the terrace again, talking animatedly to Lila, gesturing at the stars. I realized then that simply exposing him wasn't enough. He would deny it, spin it, claim misunderstanding. And Lila, caught between blood and truth, would be torn apart. I needed more than footage. I needed intent. I needed to let him believe his plan was working. That was the moment I decided to stop avoiding the edge. I joined them, smiling, playing my part. Nolan's eyes lit up when he saw me. There you are, he said. We were just talking about getting one last photo tomorrow. Sunrise this time. Best light of all. Sounds perfect, I said. He smiled wider. He thought he was winning. He had no idea I was already preparing to let him show exactly who he was. And if that meant standing close to the edge again, closer than ever, so be it. Some truths only surface when you stop stepping back. I spent the rest of the night thinking through every angle, every risk. The footage Sophia had shown me replayed in my head on a loop. Nolan's calm efficiency, the practiced ease with which he'd tamper with a bottle, the way he'd move like someone who had rehearsed the act long before stepping into that kitchen. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a plan. Just before dawn, I slipped out of bed and went down to the study. I found Richard already there, sitting in the half-light with his glasses perched low on his nose, scrolling through emails he probably wasn't reading. You're up early, he said. So are you? I replied, closing the door behind me. I need to show you something. I told him about Sophia, about the footage, about the vial. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard looked genuinely shaken. He leaned back in his chair, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and stared at the ceiling. Grant, he said slowly, this goes far beyond family conflict. If that substance had gone into your system, I know. You need to call the authorities. Now. And say what? I asked. That my nephew tried to poison me, but failed because I didn't drink the wine? He'll deny it, claim it was a supplement, or medicine, or say the footage is misleading. And Lila, my voice caught for a second, Lila would be dragged through it. Richard studied me. You're thinking about letting this play out. I'm thinking about letting him reveal himself, I said, completely, with witnesses, with no room to twist the truth. That's reckless, he snapped. You're talking about using yourself as bait. I'm talking about ending this, I said quietly, once and for all. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, Eleanor would have hated this plan. She would have understood why. I replied, by mid-morning. Nolan was buzzing with energy. He moved through the villa like a man on a mission, checking his phone, suggesting breakfast plans, commenting on the weather with forced cheer. Sunrise tomorrow, he said more than once. It's going to be incredible. Lila noticed the tension, even if she didn't understand it. You're both acting weird, she said as we sat by the pool. If this is about work, please stop. I just wanted 3 days where we weren't complicated. I reached over and squeezed her hand. I promise you, I said, meaning it more than she could know. After tomorrow, nothing will be complicated anymore. That afternoon, Sophia quietly slipped me a small flash drive. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw fear there, but also resolve. I trust you, she said. Thank you. I replied, you've done the right thing. As sunset approached, Nolan suggested we open another bottle. I declined again, citing dehydration, and this time I saw irritation flash across his face before he masked it. Suit yourself, he said. More for the rest of us. I watched him pour his own glass. He drank deeply, as if to demonstrate something. It didn't reassure me. It confirmed what I already suspected. Whatever he'd planned wasn't limited to poison. After dinner, Richard announced he needed to review some paperwork with me the next morning. Foundation documents, he said loudly enough for Nolan to hear. Early, Nolan asked. Very, Richard replied. Sunrise, actually. Nolan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That night, I barely slept again. I lay there listening to the sea, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't afraid of dying. Not exactly. I was afraid of leaving things unfinished, of letting lies stand, of letting my daughter live with someone capable of killing for money. Just before sunrise, the villa stirred. Nolan knocked on my door, his voice bright. Ready, Uncle Grant? You don't want to miss this. I stepped out onto the terrace. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the air cool and sharp. Richard stood near the doorway, pretending to read something on his phone. Sophia hovered inside, her phone angled toward the glass, recording. Nolan led the way to the edge. The stone barrier that was lower than the others. The drop beyond it invisible in the dim light. Stand right here, he said, positioning himself behind me. The ocean looks endless from this angle. I stepped forward until the stone pressed against my thighs. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady. Like this? Perfect, Nolan said. Now turn around. Face the horizon. I turned my back to him, every sense screaming. I could hear his breathing change. Slower. Focused. Time stretch. Then I heard the faint scuff of his shoes on stone as he moved closer. Too close. Nolan. Lila's voice cut through the air from behind us. What are you doing? Taking a picture, he said quickly. You're blocking the light. You're not holding your phone, she said. There was a split second of silence. Then I felt it. The shove. Hard. Deliberate. The world tilted. The sky vanished. My hand slapped against the top of the stone, scraped, slipped, and then I was falling. I twisted instinctively, arms flailing, and my fingers caught metal. The impact tore a sound from my throat as my shoulders wrenched violently. Pain exploded down my arms, but I held on, legs swinging wildly before I managed to hook one foot, then the other around the railing. Above me, chaos. Oh my God, Nolan said, his voice pitched high with panic. Lila, Sophia, come quick. I stayed silent, pressing myself flat against the cliff face. hidden by the curve of stone. He just collapsed, Nolan continued, his voice dropping, steadying, clutched his chest. I think it was his heart. I think he went over. Lila screamed my name. Footsteps pounded. He was old. Nolan went on, urgency laced with something else, relief. Retirement. Stress. It happens. We shouldn't. What are you saying? Lila shouted. I'm saying think, he snapped. If they find him down there, there'll be investigations. Headlines. Your life torn apart. Wouldn't it be better if... If what? Her voice was cold now. Dangerous. I hung there, arms burning, listening as my nephew began to explain exactly how my death could be made convenient. And in that moment, as pain radiated through my body and the ocean roar below, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't about surviving the fall anymore. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how much it hurt to hear it spoken aloud. I stayed silent, my fingers locked around the cold iron, every muscle in my arms screaming for relief. The wind pushed against my back, carrying the sharp scent of salt and stone. Above me, the terrace had gone eerily still. What are you saying? Lila asked again, her voice trembling but no longer frantic. Say it clearly, Nolan. I'm saying we don't have to make this worse than it already is. Nolan replied. His tone had shifted. Calm, controlled. The same voice he used in boardrooms when he wanted people to agree, without realizing they'd been manipulated. An elderly man collapses at sunrise. It's tragic, but it's not suspicious. No one needs to know about the edge. You pushed him, she said flatly. That's insane. Nolan shot back. You saw him grab his chest. He stumbled. I tried to help. Then why aren't you holding your phone? She demanded. Why did you tell me to move away? Silence. I could picture his face, the way his jaw would be tight now, his eyes darting as he recalculated. Lila, he said softly, you're in shock. You're not thinking straight. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, she replied. And I know what I saw. From inside the villa, Sophia's voice cut through the air. I am calling the police. Don't, Nolan said sharply. You don't understand what you're doing. Oh, I understand, Sophia replied, her accent thickening with emotion. I understand very well. I felt my grip begin to weaken. My forearms burned, numbness creeping into my fingers. I had minutes at best. Above, Nolan's composure was cracking. You think you're helping, he said, his voice rising. But you're about to destroy everything Grant worked for. His reputation, his legacy, the company. Lila, do you really want his name dragged through tabloids? Tech founder dies under mysterious circumstances. Investors panicking. Foundations frozen. That's not your decision to make, Lila said. It should be, he snapped. I know how this world works. He was going to give everything away, millions, to strangers with half-baked ideas. I was the only one thinking long-term. There it was. The truth stripped bare. So this is about money, Lila said. All of it. Nolan laughed, sharp and humorless. Of course it is. Don't pretend money doesn't matter. You've never had to worry about it. You had a father who handed you everything. I earned my life, she said. You tried to take his... Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Sophia must have already made the call. Nolan swore under his breath. You're making a mistake, he said. All of you. From below, I finally spoke. The only mistake, I called out hoarsely, was thinking you'd hide who you are. Lila screamed my name. Dad. Her voice broke. Dad, where are you? I'm hanging on, I said, literally. Chaos erupted. Lila rushed to the edge, dropping to her knees, her hands gripping the stone. Oh my God, she sobbed. Oh my God, don't let go. Richard appeared beside her, face pale but focused. Grant, stay still. We've got you. Nolan staggered back as if struck. That's not possible, he muttered. You went over. I did, I said, just not far enough. Richard and Sophia moved quickly, anchoring themselves, reaching down carefully. Pain shot through my shoulders as they pulled, my arms threatening to give out before strong hands finally closed around my wrists. "On three," Richard said. "1, 2, 3. They hauled me up and over the wall. I collapsed on the stone, gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably. Lila threw herself over me, crying into my chest. "You're alive," she kept saying. "You're alive." Nolan stood frozen a few feet away, his face drained of color. "This is what it looks like," he said weakly. "I can explain." "Save it," Richard said coldly. "The authorities are on their way." Nolan's eyes flicked toward the stairs, then back to us. For a split second, I saw a calculation again, an exit strategy forming, but it vanished when blue lights flashed against the villa walls. The police arrived within minutes, followed by paramedics. I was checked over on the terrace. Bruised ribs, strained shoulders, shock, but nothing broken. As officers cuffed Nolan, he finally looked at me. "I just wanted what was fair," he said, his voice small now. "You wanted what wasn't yours," I replied, "and you were willing to kill for it." They led him away without another word. As the noise faded and the terrace emptied, Lila sat beside me, holding my hand as if afraid I'd disappear again. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I brought him into your life. I vouch for him." I squeezed her hand, wincing at the pain in my shoulder. "You didn't do this." "He did." We sat there as the sun climbed higher, painting the sea in daylight again. The same view Nolan had wanted as the backdrop for my death now framed something else entirely. The end of his lies, and the beginning of consequences he could never outrun. The terrace slowly emptied, but the weight of what had happened didn't lift with the departing sirens. Paramedics insisted on checking me again inside the villa, shining lights into my eyes, wrapping my shoulders, asking the same questions in calm, practiced voices. I answered automatically, my attention fixed on Nolan's empty spot near the wall. It felt unreal that only minutes earlier, he'd been standing there calmly explaining how my death could be made convenient. They wanted to take me to the hospital in Lisbon. I refused, not because I was stubborn, though I've been accused of that, but because I needed to see this through while my feet were still on the ground and my mind was clear. If I left now, the story would start being told without me. Richard backed me up. "He's stable," he told them firmly. "Bruised, shaken, but coherent." Eventually, they relented, leaving me with strict instructions and a promise to return if anything worsened. Lila didn't let go of my hand the entire time. Inside the villa, the light felt different. The same white walls and stone floors, but stripped of their postcard charm. Everything looked exposed, as if the place itself had watched what happened and could no longer pretend it was just a vacation home. Sophia brought me water and a blanket. Her hands shook as she set them down. "You saved my life," I told her quietly. She shook her head. "You saved yourself." I only told the truth. Richard stepped into the study to speak with the police again, providing the footage and his statement. Through the open door, I heard Nolan's name repeated, followed by words like attempted homicide and premeditation. Clinical terms for something deeply personal. Lila finally spoke once we were alone. "I keep replaying it," she said. "Every moment. The way he stood behind you. The way he talked about making it easier if you were gone." She pressed her fingers into her eyes. "I trusted him." "So did I said. "Trust isn't a flaw. It's a risk." She looked at me sharply. "You knew something was wrong. Why didn't you tell me?" I took a long breath. "Because if I was wrong, I would have poisoned your relationship with him forever. And because if I was right, you would have tried to stop me from getting proof." "You used yourself as bait," she said. "Yes." "That was reckless." "Yes." She let out a shaky laugh that dissolved into tears. "Mom would have killed you." I smiled faintly. She would have grounded me for life. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the sea kept moving, indifferent to human greed and fear. Later that afternoon, an officer returned to take a more formal statement. This time, Nolan wasn't there to interrupt or deflect. I told him everything about the wine, the cliff, the shove. Richard provided the footage Sophia had saved, and when it played on the officer's tablet, even he exhaled sharply. That's clear intent, he said. They also informed us that a preliminary search of Nolan's financial records, triggered by Richard's insistence, had uncovered irregularities at Calderon Systems, quiet transfers, inflated expense reports, money siphoned off over the past year and a half. So it wasn't just desperation, Lila said later, when we were alone again. It was entitlement. Yes, I said, the most dangerous kind. That night, neither of us slept. We sat on the terrace wrapped in blankets, watching the moonlight stretch across the water. At one point, Lila broke the silence. I almost lost you, she said. And I don't even know who you really are. Not fully. I know the version who calls on Sundays, the man in headlines, but not the one who hangs onto railings and makes impossible choices. My throat tightened. That's my fault. I don't want to keep living like this, she continued, chasing deadlines, proving something. I don't even know who I'm proving it to. You don't have to decide anything tonight, I said. I know, but I don't want to waste clarity this gave me. The next few days blurred together. Statements, lawyers, quiet conversations with investigators. Nolan was formally charged and held without bail pending trial. When his lawyer reached out to request a private conversation with me, I declined. There was nothing left to say. The villa no longer felt like a place to celebrate. We decided to stay anyway, not to hide, but to breathe, to process. On the fourth morning, Lila suggested we walk down to the lower path near the cliff, the one tourists use for photos. I need to see it, she said. Where you were. We moved slowly, my shoulder protesting with every step. The iron railing was cold under my hand when we reached it. This is where you caught yourself? She asked. Yes. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles white. If you'd missed. I didn't, I said gently, and that's what matters. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I don't want to be the kind of person who almost loses everything before realizing what matters. Neither did I. That afternoon, Richard brought paperwork out onto the terrace. Foundation drafts, trust structures, safeguards, everything Nolan had pretended to care about, now handled with transparency and care. We'll do this properly, Richard said. No loopholes, no single point of control. I want Lila involved, I said, not just as a beneficiary, as a partner. Lila looked up, startled. Dad. I trust you, I said, and I want this to mean something. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay. That evening, Sophia surprised us with a simple dinner. No wine, just food, warm and grounding. Before she left us alone, she hesitated. In my village, she said softly, there's a saying, when someone shows you who they are in the dark, believe them more than what they say in the light. I thought of Nolan, of all his smiles and speeches. You were brave, I told her again. So were you, she replied. After she left, Lila leaned her head on my shoulder. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, looking out to sea, we live differently. For the first time since the sale, since the fall, since the moment my hand scraped against stone, I felt something like peace settle in. Not because the danger had passed, but because the truth no longer had anywhere to hide. The days that followed settled into an uneasy calm, the kind that comes only after something violent is torn through your life and left behind silence instead of answers. The villa no longer felt like a crime scene, but it didn't feel like a refuge either. It felt like a place of reckoning. Investigators returned twice more, once with a forensic specialist who examined the terrace and the stone wall, and once with a financial crimes officer who asked me questions about Nolan I'd never imagined answering. When had he joined the company? What level of access did he have? Did I ever suspect he resented my daughter? I answered everything honestly, even when it made me sound blind or naive. He was family, I said more than once. I never looked at him like a threat. That sentence haunted me, because the truth was, somewhere along the way, I had started treating trust as automatic instead of earned. Success had insulated me. I hadn't noticed how hunger changes people. One afternoon, while Lila was on a call with her firm back in Boston, postponing projects, delegating authority in a voice that sounded calmer than I knew she felt, Richard joined me on the terrace. They're building a strong case, he said. The footage, the witness statements, the financial trail. Nolan's attorney is already talking about plea options. How long? I asked. Attempted murder alone could put him away for decades, Richard replied. Add the embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy, it won't be light. I nodded, but there was no satisfaction in it. Just a dull wait. Do you want to see him? Richard asked carefully. If he requests it. No, I said without hesitation. There's nothing left between us. That night, Lila and I talked longer than we had in years. Not about the incident directly, but about everything it had cracked open. I don't remember you at my school plays, she said quietly. I remember Mom always scanning the audience anyway, like she hoped you'd surprise us. I closed my eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing. I know, she said, but intention doesn't undo absence. She wasn't accusing me. She was telling the truth, and somehow that hurt more. I don't want to repeat that pattern, she went on. I don't want to wake up 20 years from now realizing I built something impressive but hollow. You don't have to, I said. You can choose differently. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Are you? Yes, I said, and for the first time, I believed it without reservation. 2 days later, news broke. Someone had leaked details to the press. The story spread fast. Headlines about a tech founder surviving an attempted murder by his own nephew. The photos of the villa, the cliff, the dramatic language. Lila wanted me to release a statement. I refused. I don't want to be known for what almost happened, I said. I want to be known for what I do next. Richard understood. He arranged for one controlled interview with a journalist I respected. I told the story without spectacle. No cliffhangers. No embellishment. Just facts. When it was published, it ended with a line that stuck with me. Survival doesn't change a man. It reveals him. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since arriving. A week after the incident, we decided to leave the villa, not because we were running from it, but because we were ready to move forward. Before we left, Lila asked me to walk with her one last time to the overlook. I need to close this chapter, she said. We stood there together, the wind softer now, the sea calm. I thought losing you would break me, she said, but it clarified something instead. What's that? That I don't want to live reactively anymore. I want to build a life on purpose. I smiled. That might be the hardest work of all. She laughed softly. Good thing I come from stubborn people. Back in California, the pace picked up quickly. Lawyers, accountants, boards, foundations. Nolan officially entered a plea agreement to avoid trial, admitting guilt on multiple counts. I didn't attend the hearing. I read the summary later and felt nothing. Not relief, not anger, just finality. Lila took a formal leave of absence from her firm. 3 months, renewable. Her partners were shocked. She didn't care. I need space to think, she told them. Real thinking. We began meeting twice a week. Not as CEO and heir, but as father and daughter. Sometimes we talked about the foundation. Sometimes about Eleanor. Sometimes about nothing at all. One evening, as we were sorting through old photos of my study, Lila picked one up and smiled. You remember this? She asked. It was from a beach trip when she was 12. One of the rare days I'd skip work. I do, I said. Your mom bribed me with a promise I wouldn't bring my phone. You were terrible at relaxing, she teased. I still am, I admit it, but I'm learning. She set the photo down. I want to help shape the foundation, she said. Not just fun startups. I wanted to stand for something different. Tell me, I said. I want to support people who build with intention, she replied. Not just growth for growth's sake. Businesses that solve real problems. That don't hollow people out. I felt a familiar swell of pride. But this time, it wasn't tangled with regret. That sounds exactly like something your mother would have said. I told her. Her eyes softened. Then we're doing it right. As the weeks passed, my body healed faster than I expected. The bruises faded. The pain receded. What lingered was awareness of how close everything had come to ending, and how different things felt now. Sometimes, late at night, I still felt the phantom pull of gravity, the memory of slipping, of catching, of deciding to hold on. But more and more, that memory stopped feeling like fear. It felt like a line drawn between who I had been and who I was choosing to become. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Plain with benches, fluorescent lighting, none of the grandeur people imagine when they think about justice being served. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, procedural, almost mundane, and somehow that made everything feel heavier. I sat beside Richard in the second row, hands folded, listening as Nolan was brought in wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. He looked thinner, smaller. The confidence that once filled every room he entered had drained out of him, leaving behind a man who finally understood he was no longer in control. Lila chose not to attend. She told me she didn't need to see him again to move forward. I respected that. When Nolan stood to enter his plea, his voice was steady, but it lacked conviction. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word landed like a dull thud. No excuses, no grand speeches, just admissions. The judge listened, expression unreadable, then spoke at length about trust, how it forms a foundation of families, businesses, societies, how betraying that trust corrodes everything it touches. You did not merely attempt to end a life, the judge said. You attempted to rewrite reality for your own benefit. That is a level of premeditation this court cannot ignore. Nolan was sentenced to 27 years. I didn't look at him when the gavel came down. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was something closer to mourning. Not for the man he'd become, but for the boy he once was, the one my brother had trusted me with. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Microphones, cameras, questions shouted over one another. I raised a hand. No comments, I said calmly. Today isn't about me. And I meant it. That evening, I drove home alone. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't make phone calls. I let the quiet stretch, letting the events of the day settle into something I could live with. When I walked into my house, the one Eleanor and I had bought decades earlier, it felt different. Lighter, as if something had finally been resolved. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the familiar scratches in the wood, each one tied to a memory. Homework nights, hurried breakfasts, late dinners eaten alone. I thought about how close I'd come to never seeing this room again. The next morning, Lila came over early. She brought bagels and coffee, just like she used when she was younger, and wanted to soften me up before asking for something. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said. Strange question, but yes. She nodded. I've been thinking a lot. That usually means something big is coming, I said. She smiled faintly. I'm stepping back from my firm. Not permanently, but I'm handing over day-to-day control. I waited, letting her say it in her own time. I want to work with you, she continued, on the foundation, on redefining what success looks like for us. For us, I asked. She met my eyes. As a family. Something in my chest tightened, not painfully, but deeply. I like that, I said. The foundation work became our shared project. We weren't just signing checks. We were meeting founders, listening to stories, asking hard questions, not just about revenue, but about values, about balance, about why they were building what they were building. Some walked away uninterested. Others leaned in, relieved to finally be asked something other than how fast they could scale. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Lila looked exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. This feels different, she said. It feels honest. That's because it is, I replied. As months passed, the story faded from headlines. New scandals replaced old ones. Nolan became a footnote. That anonymity felt like a mercy. Occasionally, someone would ask if I forgave him. I never liked that question. Forgiveness isn't a switch, I'd say. It's a process. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let go without reopening the door. What I did forgive was myself. For not seeing sooner. For working too much. For confusing provision with presence. One night, Lila called me late. I didn't mean to wake you, she said breathlessly. But I needed to tell you. I sat up instantly. What's wrong? Nothing, she laughed, half crying. Everything's right. I'm pregnant. For a moment, I couldn't speak. You're serious? I finally managed. Yes, she said softly. And I want you to be part of this. Really part of it. Tears blurred my vision. I will be, I said. I promise. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, overwhelmed by gratitude. Life had given me a second chance, not just to survive, but to show up. In the months that followed, I found myself measuring time differently, not by quarters or milestones, but by moments. Dinners shared, walks taken, conversations that wander without purpose. One afternoon, Lila and I sat on my back porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Do you ever think about it? She asked quietly. The cliff? Yes, I said, but not the way I used to. She waited. I don't think about the fall anymore. I said, I think about the choice. The moment I decided not to shout, not to panic, to see the truth, even if it hurt. She nodded slowly. That choice changed everything. It did, I agreed, but the real change came after. When I decided what to do with the life I still had, she leaned her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. I'm glad you held on, she said. So am I replied. As the light faded, I felt something settle inside me, a sense that while the worst was behind us, the best might finally be ahead, not because life had become safe, but because it had become honest. The older I get, the more I understand that endings rarely arrive with ceremony. They slip in quietly, disguised as ordinary days. The case closed without fanfare. The final documents were signed. Nolan disappeared into the system, reduced to an inmate number and a cautionary headline that most people would forget within a year. Life didn't pause to acknowledge what might have been lost. It simply continued. Lila moved into a different rhythm. She didn't abandon her profession, but she reshaped it. Her firm downsized, refocused. She stopped chasing prestige projects and started choosing work that felt human. Designs for community housing, clinics, schools, spaces meant to hold lives, not just impress investors. I watched her transform with a mix of pride and humility. She wasn't becoming more like me. She was becoming more herself. The foundation launched quietly 6 months later. No gala, no champagne towers, just a converted warehouse in Oakland. Sunlight spilling through high windows, desks arranged in open clusters, whiteboards filled with ideas that hadn't been suffocated by profit yet. We named it after Eleanor. That felt right. She'd always believed success should leave a mark that mattered. On opening day, Lila walked through the space slowly, running her hand along a wall she'd insisted remain unfinished. So people remember it still being built, she said. I smiled, just like us. We funded our first group of founders that year. Some failed. Some struggled. A few thrived. What mattered was that they were supported as people, not just numbers. I sat in on pitch sessions, not to judge, but to listen. For the first time in decades, I felt engaged without being consumed. At night, when the house was quiet, I sometimes thought back to the cliff, not with fear, but with clarity. I remember the exact sensation, my fingers closing around the iron railing, the moment when instinct gave way to decision, when I chose silence, not out of weakness, but to let the truth speak. That choice echoed forward, shaping everything that came after. Lila's pregnancy changed the tempo of our lives again. Doctor visits, nursery debates, laughter that came easier than it had in years. I attended appointments, assembled furniture badly, and listened more than I spoke. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sky darken, she turned to me. You know, she said, I used to think strength meant never needing help. And now, I asked, and now I think it means knowing when to hold on and when to let go. I nodded. She'd learned the lesson faster than I had. When my grandchild was born, everything rearranged itself inside me. The first time I held that tiny, fragile life, I felt the full weight of how close I'd come to never experiencing that moment. The thought didn't terrify me anymore. It grounded me. I made myself a promise then. I would be present, not occasionally, not when it was convenient. Fully, weeks turned into months. The world kept spinning. New crises replaced old ones. People asked fewer questions about the past. That was fine. The past had done its work. One afternoon, I received a letter from the prison system. Nolan had written to me. I stared at the envelope for a long time before setting it aside, unopened. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel curiosity. I felt finished. Some stories don't need another chapter. Instead, I went for a walk. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet. I passed families, dogs, joggers moving through their own ordinary miracles. I realized then that survival hadn't been my greatest gift. Perspective had. I understood now what Eleanor had tried to tell me all those years ago. That success measured in numbers is fragile. That empires collapse. That time, once lost, doesn't negotiate. The night before my granddaughter's first birthday, Lila called me. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for staying." I knew what she meant. Not just surviving, but choosing to live differently afterward. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Later, alone on my balcony, I watched fog roll in from the bay, slow and inevitable. I thought about greed, about trust, about how close I'd come to letting silence mean the end instead of the beginning. Life will push you to edges you never expected. Sometimes literally, sometimes quietly over years. When it does, you don't always get to choose what happens to you, but you always get to choose what happens next. I chose to hold on. I chose to tell the truth. I chose to live. And that choice made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, do me one last favor. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach others who may be standing at their own edge, wondering whether to let go or hold on.